Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Bustamante. Today we're going to kind of compare and contrast nucleic acids, or really the similarities and the differences between DNA and RNA. So the first thing I want to talk about is some of the similarities between DNA and RNA. So they're both going to be made of a 5 carbon sugar and a phosphate group, and they're going to have a nitrogenous base on them, the base over here. They're always both going to be synthesized in what we say is the 5' to the 3' direction. That means we're always going to add our nucleotides to the 3' OH group on your molecule. So you'll notice your 5' end is the end with your phosphate group, and your 3' end is your end with your OH group. So they're always going to add to this 3' end. That means we're going to kind of synthesize either DNA, I guess you could say, that's double-stranded in opposite directions at the same time when we get to that point. Another thing we'll notice about them is they do have some differences. Okay, so if we go back to this image here, we're going to label our carbons in a very specific manner. At some point, hopefully in your science career, you'll learn why it is in that manner. But for now, we're just going to kind of accept it because they're both 5' sugars. We're going to take kind of where this oxygen is in our ring, and we're going to go carbon 1, 2, 3, 4, and this 5th carbon up here is the 5' carbon actually. So you'll notice that both of them are 5' 5 carbon sugars, excuse me. DNA sugar is deoxyribose and RNA sugar is ribose. And there's kind of just really one small difference you'll notice between them, and that's this OH group that exists in ribose and this hydrogen that is in deoxyribose. You can kind of think of it as like no oxygen, right? And that's really the difference in the two sugars that make them up, but it plays a kind of important role later on. So the bases in DNA and RNA are mostly the same except for one difference. DNA is going to have the nitrogen base thymine, and RNA is going to have the nitrogen base uracil. They both have adenine, they both have guanine, and they both have cytosine. So most of the time those bases match up the same. Guanine and cytosine will always match up in DNA and RNA. But in DNA, adenine and thymine will match up, but if you have RNA, adenine will match with uracil. So those are the difference in the bases. Another difference between DNA and RNA is that DNA is double-stranded. It looks like this. We call it a double helix. RNA is typically single-stranded. There is an instance it can sometimes like fold back on itself and kind of look double-stranded-ish, and that is actually called a ribosome, and it will catalyze some certain reactions, but for the most part, RNA is single-stranded, DNA is double-stranded. And DNA is anti-parallel, okay? We say it's anti-parallel because the two strands are in opposite directions. The 5' strand will match with the 3' end of the other strand, or its complementary strand, we sometimes say, at both ends, if you will. And RNA, right, is just single-stranded, so it's not going to be anti-parallel. There's just one strand to deal with.